In this tutorial, I'm going to show you 4 tips that you can apply to any one of your songs right now to create a bigger drop. Don't miss out on this one. What is up, everyone? Welcome to another music production tutorial. I'm your host and founder of SOUNDSHOCK, Daniel. Now, if you guys want to learn more music production tips when it comes to mixing, mastering, sound design, and arrangement, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the bell notification next to it so you don't miss when I release a new video. Also, I would love to hear if you guys have your own personal tips and tricks for creating bigger drops. Feel free to put those tips in the comments below. Now, the drop or chorus in your track is the most important part of your song. This section of your song will include the main theme. It needs to be as impactful as possible in order for your song to be successful. The sounds that you select for your drop, the notes that the different instruments play, and how well these elements are mixed together will determine how good your drop or chorus is. But there are a few simple tips that we can use to enhance your already existing drop or chorus, or any drop or chorus that you plan to create. When looking to create a larger than life sound, we can change the dynamics, stereo imaging, and frequency content of our entire song to trick the human ear into thinking the song is louder, wider, and fuller. Remember that the human ear responds to changes over time, and making even just small adjustments to the dynamics, stereo imaging, and frequency content can fool the human ear into thinking something sounds bigger, without there being a real noticeable change in the song and its dynamics. This brings us to tip number 1 for creating bigger drops.
And that first tip is to use gain automation. Before I go any further, I just want to let you know that these tips can be applied to any one of your songs in any DAW. So you do not need to be using Ableton to use these tips. To the human ear, louder sounds always seem to sound better. Knowing this, we can trick our ear into thinking our drop sounds louder with the simple gain automation. So go on over to your master channel and throw on a gain or utility plugin. Really, any plugin that has a gain knob on it, you can use in this situation. Now, to trick the human ear into thinking that the drop sounds louder, I like to gradually drop the volume of my entire song in the build-up, and then bring back the volume right before the drop hits. What this does is it gets the listener's ear used to having less volume without it appearing noticeable. And once the human ear is used to having a lower volume, it'll sound louder once it is brought back to a normal volume and when the drop hits. So let's go ahead and create an automation curve to gradually drop the volume as the buildup continues on, and then right before the drop, we'll bring back the volume. And we chose a gain reduction of around -3 decibels here. Once again, we want this dip in volume to be unnoticeable to the human ear, and I have found that around 3 decibels is the sweet spot for this. If you reduce it too little, you don't have quite the impact and quite the loudness when the drop hits. If you go over 3 decibels, I have found that it is very noticeable to the human ear. You can really hear the dip in volume and it coming back up when the drop hits. So here is our curve. You can see that it's gradually going down. So let's have a listen to our song without the gain plugin first, and then with. Now with. It's a very subtle difference, but the drop now appears larger because we took away the volume as the build up was playing and then brought it back in when the drop hit. And now for tip number 2, and that is to use stereo automation in our build up to create the perception of a bigger drop. So this is taking the same idea from tip number 1 and applying it to the stereo field. So what we are going to do is we are going to apply gain reduction to the sides of our stereo field as the build-up plays, and then bring it back to unity like we did in the gain automation when the drop hits. For all of you that are confused with mid and side of the stereo field, I encourage you to check out my how to use a mid-side EQ tutorial, and I explain the mid and the sides of the stereo field in great depth. So taking away these sides of the stereo image will make the track seem like it is more in mono. So as the build-up continues on, the sides will be taken away and it'll slowly start to sound like it is a bit more mono, and the sides of the stereo image are collapsing and the track will become more narrow. And once the drop hits, we'll turn it back to unity and the drop will seem like it is wider. And to adjust the volume of the sides of our stereo image, I'm going to be using the free plugin VOXENGO's MSED. And I will put a link to this free plugin in the description of the video. As you can see, we have knobs to adjust the gain of the mid channels or center of the stereo image and the sides of the stereo image. So let's go ahead and automate the side gain. And I have chosen a gain of around -2.4 decibels. So -2.4 decibels of the sides of our stereo image are being reduced. And once again, too little taken away and we don't really notice this effect. And if too much is taken away, then it is noticeable to the listener. Again, we want these effects to be subtle, and -2.4 decibels is a sweet spot for this. So let's go ahead and listen to the track without any processing and then with just the side reduction processing. Without any processing. Now with the side gain automation. Once again, very subtle, but the track now appears wider in the drop. And now our third tip is to use stereo automation again, but this time on the actual drop itself. So we know we want our drop to sound louder, fuller, and to be more stereo spread. So what we can do is increase the sides of the stereo image of our track on the actual drop to make it appear wider. And using our same free plugin, VOXENGO MSED, we can increase the gain of the sides of the stereo image just a little bit so the track will appear wider. So as the build-up goes, we're taking away the stereo image of the track, and then once the drop hits, we're boosting it a little bit, and this difference will give the listener's ear a greater perception of width. So let's go ahead and adjust the side gain on the drop. And once again, a little will go a long way here. We want to make sure that it is not noticeable to the listener's ear that we have increased the side gain. We want to make sure that we have enough gain so it is perceived as wider. And to my ears, 1.3 decibels has found to be the sweet spot for this. So let's have a listen to the track with the side gain automation on and off. With it off. Now with it on. As you can hear, the track now sounds much wider with the side gain automation on the buildup and on the drop. And then the fourth and final tip for creating bigger drops is to use compression automation. Again, the goal of mixing our drops is to have them be the most exciting part of the mix. So having the elements front and center in your track is a great way to approach the mixing of your drop. So what I like to use is a little bit of compression on only the drop to create a more glued together and upfront sound. I like to keep the compressor settings pretty mild here. Once again, the goal is to just glue the sounds together by applying a little bit of compression and bring all the sounds more front and center in the mix, which a compressor does as it reduces the dynamic range of your track. But I'm only going to be reducing the dynamic range ever so slightly, so this added compression on the drop won't sound obvious to the listener. I'm going to be using Ableton's compressor for this, but really any compressor will do here. And if any of you guys are a little confused on how to use a compressor, are confused about what the dynamic range of your track is, and want to learn more of the basic controls of a compressor, then I would suggest that you go ahead and check out the how to use a compressor tutorial that I have made. I'll put a link down in the descriptions below, as you will need a basic understanding of a compressor's basic controls to understand what I am doing with this particular tip for creating bigger drops. So let's go ahead and set our compressor settings. The first one is the ratio setting. We're gonna go ahead and set this to 3:1. The ratio is the strength of the compressor. So we want a fairly mild setting here, as once again, we don't want very aggressive compressor settings. And then the attack, we're gonna go ahead and put that up to around 30 milliseconds, 34 milliseconds, as we want to let the initial transients, the initial drum hits of our song come through. We don't want to squash these peaks. We still want our track to be nice and punchy, and having an attack at 0 milliseconds or a lower attack won't let these transients through. And then our release time, we're gonna have it around 121 milliseconds, as we don't want the compressor to lessen its clamp on the audio quickly. We want this to affect most of the song here. And for the threshold, we'll adjust it as the drop is playing, so we get around -1 to -3 decibels of gain reduction. So we'll go ahead and watch this meter here. And a threshold of -17.5 gives us a gain reduction of around 2.3 decibels here. And to account for this gain reduction, we're gonna go ahead and turn the output up around 2.3 decibels here. That way, the song doesn't sound quieter. Now that we have the compressor settings, let's go ahead and automate on the compressor only on the drop. So as you can see, the compressor is not activated on this build-up section. It's turned off. Then once it hits the drop, the compressor is active. So let's go ahead and listen to the drop with and without the compressor. Without the compressor. And now with the compressor. Again, very subtle, but the drop now sounds more glued together and a bit more upfront. So now we're going to be listening to all the master automation that we have done to this track to really hear the difference that the gain automation, the side gain automation, and the compressor automation has done. So again, let's listen to the track without any automation. And now with. Our drop now sounds louder, wider, and more present, which is what we want to make the biggest impact on the listener.
Thank you for checking out the video, everyone. You guys can now get into your DAW and start applying these tips to any one of your songs and create a bigger drop. If you have any questions about the tutorial at all, don't hesitate to put your questions down in the comments below, as I read all of them and respond to all of them. Also, remember to check out the SOUNDSHOCK audio website, as all your music production needs will be met on this site, as there are tons of free downloads for you guys in the form of free plugins, free KONTAKT instruments, free samples and loops, and free presets. In addition to these free downloads, there are also other tutorials on the site that you'll definitely want to check out to improve your productions, as well as my favorite part of the website, the artist interviews, where I interview professional artists and ask them specific music production related questions, so you guys can get a glimpse into how these professionals create their tracks and can start applying the tips right after reading the interviews. And remember to click the subscribe button if you want to learn more tips and tricks when it comes to mixing, mastering, sound design, and arrangement. So that's going to do it for this tutorial, everyone. See you guys next time.